Our session on hydrogen fueling the future, global opportunities and challenges. We have a very distinguished panel, and I'm very happy to be moderating this panel. So the name and the explanation, as you see in programs, pretty much gives you the outline of what we're going to talk today. Hydrogen, for a lot of us assert, is an important part of a sustainable future. It presents a lot of business opportunities, a lot of enabling technologies, as well as a lot of geopolitical and international and economic challenges. And I think the more we discuss, the more we'll have a chance of delineating sustainable and plausible and actionable ways of putting hydrogen in the global energy mix. And in doing so, I just want to introduce our panelists, starting from the far side. We have a very interesting and a very global panel today. I want to start with Quentin Blommaert. Quentin is currently heading the Hydrogen Diplomacy Office, which is an initiative of the German Federal Foreign Office, GIZ, which is the German International Cooperation here in Riyadh. So the German Foreign Service has several hydrogen diplomacy offices around the world, and Riyadh is one of them, which itself is actually an interesting thing to note. Folks at the entrance, at the door, could we please a little bit keep it down? Dear organizers at the entrance. All right. So back to Quentin. After thrilling years as a manager for trade associations in Brussels and Berlin, he came for the first time to Saudi Arabia to work for the German Chamber of Commerce, where he spent several years here within GESALO and the German Federal Export and Investment Agency. So during that time, his main area was renewable energy at large, and especially within the kingdom. And then he went back to Bonn a couple of years, for 2 years, as a manager industries focusing on energy and environmental technologies and bridging GCC to Berlin and Bonn and vice versa. And then he found his way back to Riyadh. I'm very happy to have him. And a personal note is he's also my swimming partner on, whenever we are both in the city, he's a great friend and a great colleague to learn from. That takes me to, just let me see. So Kartik is a very interesting CV, as well as his website, which was great. He's an engineer by training. Kartik, it really bridges a lot of the debates that we do in hydrogen and elsewhere in energy policy, because he's the person at CEW India to connect different projects and pretty much get the best research outcomes of all these efforts. So he's the one who has the eagle-eyed view over all these bits and pieces of knowledge that's produced in CEW. He's a fellow and director in research coordination at the council, CEW, and as a director, as I told you, he has a bird's eye view on CEW's ongoing and planned research, and ensures cross-team coherence, which is something I think in renewable energy that we have to think over and over again, because it's such a multifaceted challenge that we are dealing with. He has played pivotal roles in conceptualizing and executing some of the research projects that a lot of us across the globe as researchers use, such as the Access and the IRIS surveys, and the associated studies coming out of them. He's also led the Greenhouse Gas Platform Initiative and the first full-fledged office based out of Lucknow, India. He continues to be an active researcher with the power sector, and he holds a master's and degree in public policy from Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy in National University of Singapore. So that takes me to Jin Sok-Young. So Dr. Sung is a research professor at the Center for International Area Studies of Hankook University of Foreign Studies. That's a long name, right, in Seoul, Korea, and he's also lecturing at the same university. And previously, he was also a research fellow at the Department of Political Science and Diplomacy at the Hallym University of Graduate Studies, again in Seoul. Prior to his career at universities, he was a visiting researcher at BOFIT and the Institute for Emerging Economies at the Bank of Finland. He holds a PhD from Gopkin Russian State University in Moscow on oil and gas, and he received his BA from Hanyang University in South Korea. And also he has been leading several international research projects on global energy markets, partnering with research institutions throughout the globe. He's also an expert in Asia Pacific and Eurasian energy markets. Least but not last, we have Mohammed Akimaya. He's currently an assistant professor of economics at KFUPM, King Fahd University of Petroleum and Minerals Business School in Dhahran, in Saudi Arabia. He's also an affiliate to the Interdisciplinary Research Center for Renewable Energy and Power Storage Initiative, and he also serves as a guest affiliate in the Interdisciplinary Research Center for Hydrogen Energy Storage. So if you look at all of our panelists here, you see there is a recurring theme which is being interdisciplinary and somehow having a strategic and bird's eye view to renewable and eventually parking at least some of their attention on hydrogen. So I think that's something that I really want to highlight before I move on. He has a PhD from Colorado School of Mines, and he has publications in top journals such as Energy Economics, Journal of Transport Economics, and most recently, and one of my favorites, at Energy Research and Social Science. He's been teaching macroeconomics and energy economics courses at KFUPM and has been an active member of the IAEE and IATMI KSA, which is Association for Indonesian Oil and Gas Practitioners and Saudi Arabia. One last thing about Mohammed is that he also worked for BP Migas, which is an Indonesian state upstream oil and gas activities regulator, where he served as an assistant to the deputy chairman for financial control. So we have that financial and the investment evaluation angle here as well. So that takes us to our panel. So it's a large topic. It's a politically motivated topic. In the social media, it attracts a lot of clicks and a lot of views for the better or not so better purposes, but it is something that's really central to the kingdoms, the GCCs, as well as the global energy strategy. So I want to start with this new kid on the block, and I want to start with Professor Sung. So let's just start with some of the basics, right? How does hydrogen change the global energy landscape? Is it a substitute or is it a complement to existing energy vectors or energy carriers? So what's your take on this? Why is hydrogen such a big, why did this new kid on the block make such a big hype in global energy circles?
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation to this prestigious event. I'm very pleased to have an opportunity to share my thoughts and opinions and have a discussion with these distinguished experts. And thank you for the introduction on my previous works and on this session. Then I would like to discuss the role of hydrogen, especially for the consumer countries like South Korea, which can be maybe considered as a new kids on the block. And I would like to first of all share my slides to explain my thoughts. And could you please start my presentation, please? Yeah.
It's up here, but I think you have to be able to see it here as well.
We see your...
Oh, it's up here. Okay. Okay. So that I would like to have a look at the three main points that hydrogen will be a game changer or a supplementary fuel or energy carrier for in the energy market, and second, that how the hydrogen can change the energy landscape. Will it strengthen the position of existing energy superpowers, or will it bring more competitions to the energy market? And third one, and how global that hydrogen market can be developed in the future. So first of all, I would like to move on to the next slide. Okay. I'm sorry, but coming here.
Can we just ask for it here as well, Emre?
Yeah, I'm just told that. Yeah, could you please reflect the slides on our monitor screens here, please?
Yes, so if I just continue with my speech, that I believe that hydrogen will play more as a supplementary role in the energy market rather than a game changer, or it will replace the oil and gas and many other sectors, because hydrogen obviously have a lot of potential in decarbonization, and it has a more environmental how to say that, advantage rather than economic advantage. And in my opinion, that the role or share of hydrogen has been strengthened or increased after the ratification of a Paris Agreement, and because in many countries has had to set up a very high climate goals. In each country has a very, very ambitious climate goals, which cannot, is very difficult, which is challenging to achieve with the introduction of a new alternative fuels. And in my opinion, that many countries have decided to introduce hydrogen and to achieve these climate targets. And otherwise, with the current energy carriers, it's very difficult to achieve the climate goals. And at the same time, after the outbreak of the pandemic in 2020, the many countries has bolstered green economy plans or to develop renewable sectors to support as a subsidy to the economies. After the process of after this process, the role of hydrogen has been increased or even multiplied in the share of future energy mix or in meeting a climate target. Because without introducing alternative fuels like hydrogen is very challenging to meet this very ambitious climate targets, and therefore and at the same time that hydrogen has a clear limitation, that it is less effective, it is more expensive, and it is more difficult to use in comparison with other competing fuels. So in my opinion, that hydrogen will play a role in energy market, rather as a supplementary role in decarbonization, rather than replacing or current existing other oil and gas or coal or other fuels in the energy sector. Theoretically, that hydrogen can be produced in every countries. So in the consuming countries like South Korea, that in the beginning it was considered that hydrogen can play a very important role in enhancing energy security, but later, after the intense analysis, that producing hydrogen in a country like South Korea is not very feasible, because it's very expensive and has to be imported to be introduced in the energy system in a country like South Korea. So if I look at the next point, that how global can does hydrogen strengthen the existing hydrocarbon leader or bring competitions? And I believe that there will not be the serious change in the energy market or in the energy landscape, because it's very important to have experience of energy market and project to conduct large-scale energy products, large-scale energy project. Without such experience, it's very difficult, in my opinion, that even though the hydrogen can be produced in many countries, that countries or companies with the experience of conducting large-scale energy project can deal with new energy carriers like hydrogen. So of course that hydrogen is also one of the gases, and is quite similar to the natural gas industry. So that existing incumbent energy companies can do very well in comparison with the new entrants in the companies. So experience of cooperation and network and know-how and trust in completing major energy projects between the countries will be very useful, and it will make it easier to work together, which means that existing energy trade relationship between consumers and the exporters will prevail, then, rather than having with the new trade relationship between the consumers and new hydrogen exporters. Hydrogen is quite expensive, and it's a large-scale investment needed to bring down the cost, which can be achieved, in my opinion, only by the countries or companies which has experience in the energy industry. Therefore, I believe that there will not be the serious changes in energy landscape, and experience and the country with the experience and country with the personnel and country which has a finance to conduct such energy projects will continue to prevail, in my opinion, and to play a dominant role in the hydrogen industry in the future. And last but not the least, that how global can hydrogen industry can be theoretically, but or economically and geopolitically. Then major countries and companies may continue to dominate the market with the previous reasons I've mentioned, but there'll be one difference is that Russia is not in a position to play the same role in the, how to say that, developing hydrogen market as in the oil and gas sector, that, as we all know why, and it can be Russia provides 20% of energy sources in the current energy market, and if it cannot play the same role in the newly developing hydrogen market, then it will be a difference or more, or maybe that it provides other opportunities to newcomers or existing energy major exporters like Saudi Arabia. So I believe that the hydrogen technology has not been developed fully, and it's not still cannot be used in many of technology cannot be used in commercial level. Therefore, and it's very complex to develop the hydrogen technology, and it's very difficult to transport, it's very difficult to store, and it's very difficult to use, and then technology has to make the significant advances in realizing the commercially viable, feasible hydrogen project, which makes that for the newcomers, which doesn't belong to energy industry, to make ways to hydrogen industry. Then and it's I believe that also in the commercial level that it's quite likely that industrially developed countries will be the development of hydrogen sector, and then the existing energy companies which are leading the natural gas technology will have an advantage in hydrogen industry. So I have introduced several graphs which I have developed with the colleagues in KAPSARC and Zlata Geva, which I wanted to show that there is a plans of is a national strategy and national plans of South Korea in developing hydrogen international cooperation. That here we can see that most of the partners that South Korea is considering is existing that major energy exporters. Of course, there are also other countries, but it doesn't concern that hydrogen trades. But the countries with a smaller role, currently smaller role in the energy market, they are with these countries. South Korea is planning to develop maybe technologies or other parts, but the major the partners for hydrogen trade for South Korean national energy policy is existing current major energy exporters like Saudi Arabia or Australia. So I believe that these countries still will play in the important role in the energy trade, including hydrogen in the future in Asian market. And as a last slide, that I would like to emphasize that in the beginning, when the hydrogen was getting more attention as an energy carrier or energy storage, which was around in 2018. Then, as I stated earlier, that hydrogen was considered as a way of strengthening energy security, because maybe it can be produced in South Korea. But if you look at this national energy, how to say that, mixed outlook by 2050, that more than 80% of hydrogen will be imported in 2050, even though that hydrogen technology is actively being developed and being invested in the country. And it is a national energy strategy which normally has a more, how to say that, upbeat or positive outlook, which means that if the national energy strategy, the prognosis that after 30 years that more than 80% of hydrogen will be imported to South Korea, which means that even the government believes that producing hydrogen in South Korea is economically not feasible. So I believe that that it's very small amount of hydrogen will be produced in a current energy importing countries, and because of producing hydrogen in the large scale can be done in a major energy exporting country, and it will be cheaper, much cheaper, like in countries like Saudi Arabia than in South Korea. So I believe that current landscape there will be changes, and hydrogen will play roles in decarbonization, but only as a supplementary role, but not as a game changer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this very informative overview. So one narrative that came out of your talk is, hydrogen, like many renewable technologies, started as everything on board towards like the energy transition, but as we started digging deeper, not necessarily that it's competing for other energy, it's competing for financial resources, it's competing for infrastructure dollars, and it's also competing for, let's say, stamina and international relations, because you can either spend your efforts to achieve cooperation here or there, and actually hydrogen does require a lot of global cooperation in that respect. I was stuck on one very important point when you start talking about firms. I just want to turn to Quentin because he works a lot with firms one-to-one. So we've seen some of the LOUs, MOUs globally, and it's the usual suspects, so to speak. But when it comes to hydrogen technology production, are the patents or innovation, hydrogen innovation, is the picture that global, or how are we faring as humanity in improving hydrogen technology as of now? What are the possible future centers of hydrogen innovation, hence possibly hydrogen businesses?
Thank you very much for the question, but first of all, thank you very much for having me and the GIZ and H2 Diplo on the panel, and thank you for being here, part of this distinguished panel. Regarding your question, simply refer to that last report from the IEA regarding the patents worldwide pertaining to hydrogen and technologies. Within the first few pages, that report was published beginning of this month, end of last month. It's kind of glaring which countries worldwide are performing when it comes to patenting new technologies in the hydrogen sector. Of course, it's South Korea, Japan, Germany, France, the US, a little bit Canada, China, of course, but it's kind of still in the same main technology providing countries. I myself just work for the German government here in Saudi Arabia, and it is a target for Germany, like it is for Japan or South Korea as well, to remain a technology provider for the world when it comes to upcoming revolutionary technologies. It had been the case with solar, as it had been the case, and is still the case with wind technologies. And for Germany, it is central to remain this on the forefront when it comes to R&D, of course, and Germany invests adequately a big part of its GDP into R&D within research centers. A number that comes to my mind is simply 180 is a number of universities and research institutes in Germany addressing the topic of hydrogen, which is huge for a country of 84 million inhabitants. You have this very high density in a short geographic area focusing on the central topic of hydrogen. For Germany, it is central to compete with the different also technology providers worldwide, and we need, of course, that healthy competition between the main technology providers. What might come in the future also, and this is a task of Germany, like the other main technology providers, is this sharing also of technology towards country that might also offer the better conditions. Germany has the same issue as South Korea has, or Japan, very densely populated country with rather short coastlines when compared to other countries, rather low solar radiations. In that respect, they will be importing a lot of hydrogen in the future, and accordingly we might see if a part of the value-added chain will happen maybe in a third country, and to reach that point, technology transfers or exchanges will definitely take place. Emre?
Before I turn to Kartik and Mohammed, I want to follow up one thing. So again, what I'm hearing is maybe replication of the old story where technology production or technology innovation is somewhere, and then you look for partners where hydrogen is produced, and that kind of can necessitate some geopolitical innovations from international cooperative schemes, not only at the firm but also at the state level, right? So what kind of challenges do you think the global hydrogen diplomacy runs into right now? Do we see polarization along security lines, or do we see, you know, states trying to corner the market in certain respects towards the future? So the way I hear from both of you is that we have a similar story replicating itself in the case of hydrogen. You know,
with some dissimilarities, if I might, like diversification is key for all of us. All those highly industrialized countries. I was last week in Vienna, in Austria. A lot of similarities, but in a lower scale in terms of population than Germany. But the key targets are the same. We are heavily exports dependent, and we need a lot of energy to produce all those high value-added items and goods within our borders. And with what we experienced in the last couple of years, that was very disruptive in terms of how do we see the energy landscape, what do we get, where do we get our energy from in a secure and constant way. We've noticed we need to diversify much more, but we are not the only one trying to do this. And accordingly, I do see, like in the future, even more like bilateral relations among countries. Saudi Arabia is doing it also with a lot of countries in Asia and in Europe. And Germany has been following that path for the last 10, 15 years and has been developing more than 20 energy dialogues, energy partnerships worldwide, just to boost bilateral cooperation with future key target countries, and maybe also in the future fewer providers of clean hydrogen.
Certainly, clarifying interest is the very first step towards sustained international cooperation. Yeah. Before I go to GCC applications, I want to go to Karthik for a very brief overview of where is India in all this, and where is the subcontinent generally in all this, you know?
Right. I was looking at the Jinsong slide, and clearly what was missing there was India was not anywhere in the picture. Right? Obviously, because, you know, today we're not an energy player. We import 85% of our oil and more than 60% of our nat gas. So the primary aim for India is to sort of see how can hydrogen deliver energy independence in some way. Because we see it replacing nat gas that goes into fertilizer, which is the top subsidy bill today in India. After the rise in prices, the top subsidy bill in India is through fertilizer, and as a result, if we can replace a lot of the nat gas that we procure from Qatar and from the other producers, then that's autonomy for us in some way. There is also the aspiration of trying to replace hydrogen in, in energy carbon-intensive applications like in steel. There is not as much a stated ambition for transportation, right? Because I think they see heavy vehicle electrification as sort of as a next step. So it's not there at this point in time. But the challenge that we see is this: unlike in the case of conventional fuels, for hydrogen, it's not that you're digging up the earth to get the hydrogen, right? There is a whole set of processes that need to happen for you to actually be able to deliver that hydrogen at the end use where it's needed. So innovation is needed across the entire value chain, right from production, storage, transport, distribution, and then the application. So while we are all talking about the production of the commodity, which is hydrogen, and limiting ourselves to the discussions of electrolyzer and materials for the electrolyzer, you have to develop literally new standards for every one of those five processes. And today, there is not agreement. I mean, at least, there are, of course, published standards for handling hydrogen across different applications, but they've not been notified, and most users aren't even aware of what that is. And unless we can standardize that across different countries, right, the trade of this commodity is going to become much more challenging. So as far as India is concerned, today, we know that we're endowed with the renewable energy resource, much like I think Saudi Arabia is with solar as well, and possibly UAE and the other countries where there is an aspiration that when oil and gas are phased out, there will be, RE to come in. The challenge is today, you asked the question, Emre, to, I think to Quentin, that where is the technology today? If you look at the electrolyzer manufacturers, they're again, sort of located in the key geographies, which is China, EU, US, some in, I think, some parts of East Asia, and that's about it. So there is not that much manufacturing capacity elsewhere. And unless we're able to really change the way this manufacturing happens, right, in different parts of the world, I think we're again just getting ourselves into yet another sort of oil for that matter, right? So we'll basically be switching our dependence on oil and gas to the current economies to a dependence on electrolyzer manufacture to the new economies. So there is a very important need for us to understand, of course, from the very start, what does it entail in terms of where does our dependence on electrolyzer manufacturing capacity go? Are we able to sort of indigenize the manufacturing? And then even there are trade-offs. So today the West chooses, for instance, PEM electrolyzers because the efficiency of PEM is much higher. Whereas India is more likely to go with the alkaline because efficiency is lower, but the materials required in it are not as exotic.
Sure.
So it is possible that India might go down that path and take the efficiency hit. So these are the discussions that I think in the research community we're looking at. And final point that I'd like to sort of say here, Emre, is as a researcher who's looking at what will hydrogen deliver, right? I mean, my favorite analogy is between hydrogen and it's a silly topic, right? Think of teen sex, right? Everybody's talking about it, but nobody's doing it as the joke, right? So the thing is that in India as well, there's a lot of discussion around, hydrogen is everywhere, right, in the future. And if you look at the announcements that have been coming up, but the problem is that we've not put together the frameworks for really assessing what will take us from our current state where we are today, where everything is pretty much dependent on coal, to a system that's dependent on hydrogen. So as I said, looking at the full value chain and looking at who's going to set the standards in place and allow for every one of these parties to transition is something that we need to think of, because it is not plug and play. Safety is, of course, one part of it, but there's much more to it. Yeah.
Very nice. Actually, if I may just interject a story. One of the life-changing stories that I've ever read in my life was Sherlock Holmes' Silver Blaze, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's, where the phrase "the dogs that don't bark" come from. So when I look at India in the hydrogen scene, it's not present on that map, and there should be a reason for that. So why doesn't that one bark, right? So. And one of the things I think is we don't maybe discuss too much of domestic politics and domestic impediments to hydrogen. What losers does hydrogen create? It may be a win overall for the country's welfare, but if you have concentrated losers, then they can block this. Is it the coal community? Is the electrification push that India has? Is it the federal, local, tension? So there are a lot of stories out there also for researchers among us that, that can be addressed from the perspective of hydrogen. That was very, very thought evoking. Thank you so much. So Mohammed, in light of all these, let's come to this part of the world, right? As two people who have, identified Saudi Arabia as their home, right? What do you think? What's the role for hydrogen in from our conventional point of view in energy, right? Is it again a complement? Is it a substitute? Are there challenges, or is it more like opportunity with existing energy structures if we advance hydrogen in the global energy mix?
All right. First of all, I would like to thank the organizer, and it's a pleasure for me to actually, sit here and share with you my thoughts and with the experts as well, hear from the bright minds from the other part of the world. And I would like to thank Emre as well for the nice introduction. So I strongly believe when it comes to hydrogen, this region has tremendous potential to be the global leader. The reason to that is, well, actually kind of obvious in a way that I think almost everyone would actually recognize it. No matter whether it's a blue hydrogen, whether it's green hydrogen, this region has an upper hand. For example, if you're thinking about green hydrogen, well, you can kind of know that here it's hot. Right, so when it comes to solar panel, there's tremendous potential, wind as well. So if you're looking at hydrogen production, this, specifically for green hydrogen, almost 1/3 of the production costs would actually come from electricity, because electrolysis is very energy intensive. So of course, there are other things that cover up the whole costs that makes up the capital cost, the operational cost. But when it comes to operational cost, capital cost, at the end of the day, it's just technology. And I'm a believer of spillover effect when it comes to technology. Once somebody found a technology, it will be all over the place. But when it comes to electricity, this is a totally different issue, especially when it comes to energy kind of thing. In Saudi Arabia, other than the tremendous potential for solar and wind, it's also because of the tremendous amount of available space. If you're thinking about, oh, well, we can also have solar panel, big ones in other regions, say in Europe. Well, where are you going to put it? If you look at, if you come from abroad, you look on your way from the airport, you see a lot of empty space. That can be any place that you set up or build your renewable energy generation. Not to mention, look, when it comes to financing, the region is also, they've already committed with, NEOM with the largest green hydrogen facilities. So when it comes to green hydrogen, I think we can all agree that yes, this region has the upper hand. Not just Saudi Arabia, but also other regions. Now, when it comes to blue hydrogen, well, this is even more obvious. Because when it comes to blue hydrogen, natural gas, well, this is the heaven. So, of course, if you look at, all the technical details, there are a few wrinkles that, I'll just, mention some of them. First of all, when it comes to green hydrogen, water electrolysis, obviously, because of the water, this is in arid countries. There has been experiments with salt water, or you can actually use water desalination that's already existing here in Saudi Arabia. There's also a wrinkle on the dust issues. So apparently dust, and if you've stayed in the region long enough, you've probably had quite a few of a sandstorm. Here they call it shamal. So that can affect the efficiency of the solar panels. But at the end of the day, I believe in innovation, I believe in technology, I believe that, there's a few wrinkles here and there, but at the end of the day, it will be quote-unquote solved, I would say. Now, in terms of globally, this region also has an upper hand when it comes to geographical location, right? When it comes to, if you look at the map that was, thanks Jinsok for the, nice map of, the world when it comes to hydrogen, the consumption, the utilization are mainly going to come from East Asia and also probably, or United States and also in Europe. Now, when it comes to other competitors for the GCC region, I would say Australia. Why? Because they have a lot of coal. So they can also produce blue hydrogen, which is supposedly much cheaper than green hydrogen currently. However, they are, kind of in the far corner, but when it comes to GCC region, they're actually right in the middle. So they have an upper hand as well. So all I want to say here is hydrogen can be a game changer for this region. However, that comes with a very strong assumption. And this is something that I want to highlight, and thanks to Karthik to mention about this as well. The issue is, last night, His Royal Highness mentioned, look, we might actually knock on people's door asking about hydrogen, right? Would you want to buy hydrogen? And I think this is the current issue, is that people are saying there are a lot of utilization of hydrogen, but I'm kind of like the prince. I believe it when I see it. I've been asking questions about hydrogen utilizations, but I don't really see, what would be, the go-to in order to establish a market without, real strong support from government intervention. And when it comes to, if, and this is a big if hydrogen were to grow significantly, well, first of all, there are things that I haven't mentioned. Well, there's a problem with transportations, there's a problem with storage, and also a problem with the critical minerals. So until we have a clear understanding or a clear pathway, framework in which how are we going to have this market, this is still kind of like, it's like a new trend of fashion. Everybody wants to wear it. Everybody wants to board the train. But at the end of the day, where does this lead us? I think I'll keep it as that.
Yeah, great. Actually, I want to follow up on one of the points you made, because if I were to push back, I would say, but well, Mohammed, there are a lot of countries which were naturally endowed at the beginning when a new, technology was, or a new resource was found, but that didn't necessarily translate into advantage, being a production center or not. So, when you look at existing analysis, you see a lot of optimization of existing with the existing assumptions, right? There's also something called institutional economics, right? So, I'm gonna just follow you up on that comment, and then the rest I'll turn to the panel, rest of the panel afterwards. But what are some of the key points where you can jump from being naturally, endowed with all these, free sun and free wind, I'm putting in quotes, right? Into commercial hydrogen, right? What are some of the things that we should think? I hinted at the business innovation part with Quentin, but I'm sure there are a lot of other institutional factors that should be playing in. So, especially in the GCC context, what other institutions should we strengthen here?
Right. So when it comes to to strengthen this, I believe trade would be the bilateral or unilateral trade would be one of the goal in terms of when it comes to hydrogen. Sure, currently only a few countries are adopting this. Right. Of course, the number of countries are getting bigger and bigger, but look, when it comes to India, kind of, I would say, not really into it. I'm from Indonesia. It's a big country. Also, consume a lot of energy as well. I don't think they're in. Well, there are projects here and there, but I don't know, because at the end of the day, if you look at the whole world in the sense of in terms of energy consumption, if we were trying to replace these fossil fuels or replace these hydrocarbons and use just green hydrogen, for example, there has to be some sort of help in terms of government intervention. But if we just rely on the government, I think financing, especially when it comes to least or less developed countries or even developing countries, there will be some problems. So,
but how about this region?
Well, I think when it comes to this region, the only issue in this region would be the utilization again. When it comes to this region, obviously, it's about, if my memory serves me right, it's about 7% of global hydrogen usage is in this region. So it's relatively small, even though the production potential is tremendous. So, but then again, that begs the question, well, if we're going to produce this and use this all in domestic market, I mean, okay, within 10 to 5 years, 5, 10, or 15 years, of course, maybe the industry, okay, so almost 100% of the hydrogen usage in this region is for the industrial usage. Okay, we might expect that, okay, fine, the industry might increase, it might grow significantly, but then are we just going to stop at that? I don't think that's the aim of energy transition through hydrogen. The aim of energy transition through hydrogen is to actually help, for example, the least decarbonized industry sector, for example, like airplanes, even though I think a few weeks ago, was it last week, I think UAE has managed to, drive or ride an airplane with, synthetic fuels. But there are other usage of hydrogen. Then this is what we should be aiming for, instead of just, okay, we'll just replace the gray hydrogen with green or blue hydrogen. That's not going to leave a lot of impact when it comes to climate change.
So what I'm hearing is also we're looking for ways to carry it from concept to commercial means. So I want to get to Dr. Sung. Now, in my old days, when I was in business school, as a student, such were carefree days, some 20, 30 years ago, the cases were, the case of Korean steel, and it was the case of Korean auto, and then the case of Korean chips, microchips, right? When you show that figure, I was just thinking, are we writing a new Harvard Business School case study or Sloan School case study for the Korean case of hydrogen? Because, I think with so many, like 12 or 13 MOUs and a lot of other initiatives, what kind of institutional, innovations is Korea taking to make hydrogen a success? Could you elaborate on that?
Yes. In comparison with other energy sectors, in my opinion, that especially these days, that hydrogen is getting huge attention, especially from the government side, and because of the initiative of the central government, that which encourages the private sector to invest or take part more in the development of a hydrogen, not only market, but also the related industry. But at the same time, that it requires a very, very large amount of budget to subsidize this development, because without the government subsidies, the commercial supports, or with institutional supports, or other kind of R&D supports, it's that the private sector will lose how to say that impetus or how to say the commercial motivation to invest in the hydrogen sector. But in my opinion, that South Korea also has set a very high, how do you say, NDC goals, to very high how do you say, climate goals, which is not very easy to very challenge to achieve. And in South Korea, it is deemed that renewable energy has a very limited role, or more difficult to develop a renewable energy sector. Therefore, that government is paying more attention to the development of, how do you say, the nuclear sector, and together with the hydrogen. But as I stated earlier, that even with these supports, that all the policies will be focusing on the developing the market, or developing some core technologies. But still, it will be very, very difficult, or not economically feasible to produce it in South Korea. That is just commercially not very viable.
A follow-up question. Now, as you said, Korea is very much relying on partnerships elsewhere around the world to develop its, hydrogen economy. Currently, you are sitting at a hotbed of geopolitics. You look at left, right, up and down, and you have a lot of dormant crises that await Korea. Does that risk at all affect Korean strategy in hydrogen, keeping the lanes open, or what kind of geopolitical priorities does more reliance on hydrogen raise for Korean foreign policy?
Of course, that South Korea's dependence on the energy resources is over 95%. And in the beginning, that, as I stated earlier, that government tried to increase the domestically produced the energy resources by producing hydrogen in South Korea, but we have realized it's very difficult. Of course, it's possible, but we have to pay like several times more. But in that sense, if it's the goal is energy security, that if we pay 5 times more, why do we do that? And so the focus has been moved from producing it and producing energy resources in South Korea, but by producing hydrogen in other countries in partnership with the major partners like Saudi Arabia, with a higher share of participation of Korean companies. But obviously that under the current geopolitical situation in the East Asia, maybe it's also important to have a diversification. But if you look at the potential partners, which the national strategy suggests, is the same countries which are playing an important role in the oil and gas sector in South Korea, like Saudi Arabia and Australia. So I believe that the current development, the speed of development of hydrogen strategy in the country, we do not have any how do you say genius answer to enhancing national security or in relation with the current geopolitical situation. So that the more important thing is that to have our own technology so that we can have how do you say, our say, increase our how to say that how to say more bigger important role in the energy industry in comparison with the oil and gas, where South Korea is the only importer. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Kartik, I have a question for you. Now, India has been, I'm going to follow up on that geopolitics a little bit more. India has been known to lead a lot of the G77 and the independent movements and whatnot. And all these debates that we've been talking now requires international cooperation across oceans. And Arabian Sea and the Indian Sea becomes another important lane for that, right? Are you aware of any Indian official statements on, how that kind of geopolitical issues could hydrogen raise? Anything related to critical minerals and, whether it would take away access for other things that India is currently investing in? So if you could give us like a through the horizon of, India's geopolitical approach to hydrogen, that would be much appreciated.
To be honest, Emre, I'm not quite the expert on this, but I've been following it a little bit. To that extent, let me try and comment on it. So, India has obviously, as you know, been excluded, for instance, from the MSP, right? The Mineral Security Partnership. India is not one of the countries that's actually part of it, even though this is the year we're hosting the G20. So this is something that, of course, that we're trying to sort of push back against. Ultimately, the countries that will benefit the most from this transition, and that will in turn benefit our overall mitigation efforts, are the global south, which is where the energy consumption today is at much lower levels on per capita and in absolute terms than in the global north, right? So which means that I think it's important for countries like India to be included in such endeavors, security partnerships. And there are multiple hydrogen-related, partnerships that India is part of, right? Germany, Japan, United States, right? Through the Quad, there are many partnerships that India is definitely part of. But unfortunately, the discussions there are still at very preliminary stages and always gets kind of caught up in, how do we basically end up driving finance costs down in the Indian context, right? Which is, of course, a global debate when it comes to overall climate mitigation and how do we help drive low-cost financing from, private sector, not so much through just public support, from the private sector, enabling a reduction in the perceived risks in investing in countries like India for investors like pension funds and sovereign wealth funds overseas, to ensure that India can ultimately drive down the cost through scaling up that, right? For instance, we've declared a $2.5 billion support in the budget that just came up last week for the production of green hydrogen. So tell me one developing economy that's put that kind of money, right, into a hydrogen ecosystem. So of course, it is promised resources that will happen over the course of the next few years. But to that extent, I think India definitely sees itself as a potential for, well, alleviating the, I guess the concentration of today that's of energy resources in the hands of a few, and India can potentially sort of open it up. And to that extent, India is also equally looking at partnerships with countries like, for instance, Oman, right, which has always been, of course, Saudi is also a fantastic ally, but Oman historically has been a very big ally. We have, urea procurement, fertilizer directly with Oman through natural gas today, but in the future, we have Indian companies that have actually invested in hydrogen projects in Oman to be able to generate, green hydrogen there and convert it to urea, a high bulk commodity or a low bulk commodity compared to hydrogen, and then ship it back to India. So these are obviously avenues that I think Indian entities are also taking up to ensure that, Indian interests are catered to. And to that extent, if it creates jobs and opportunities in Oman, so be it. So I think, we have to explore this in such a way that it's not just, as I said, exchanging one import dependence for another, but creating value for another country while at the same time reducing your cost of doing business. The final point that I want to raise, I think we've discussed this here, but the delivered cost of nat gas and of specific natural gas specifically in India could be as high as $25, $30 for certain end users per MMBTU, which is astronomically high. So in all of those cases, replacement with renewable energy-based hydrogen is a real possibility even today, even at the high rates of natural gas that Jinsok and everybody else has talked about. And the good part is in India, we have the full spectrum of people using energy at, at possibly even as low as 6 MMBTU to 32 MMBTU, which means that we have the ability to drive, innovation in those people who are consuming it at 32, and then pass that benefit on to people who are using it at 6, so that eventually the entire system can be decarbonized. So I think India is a great test bed for anyone who wants to come and experiment, because we've got all price points, people consuming it at, and I think we've got the innovation ecosystem. We're working with the Department of Science and Technology, for instance, to understand where exactly are the patents today. And unfortunately, the patents and the processes are all stuck in the developed world. How can we basically then give more fillip to some of the emerging needs in economies like India? So I think that's something that India is certainly looking to do. And I think we would love to partner with, economies like Saudi Arabia and the others, where there's, I think, a growing interest in sort of becoming technology hubs beyond just the suppliers of the primary energy.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're saying that rather than competitors, we have a lot of areas to cooperate between India and the Gulf. All right. Quentin, I want to turn to you here. Since you're in diplomacy office, when I hear this panel, I mostly heard about bilateral relations: India, Oman, India, Saudi Arabia, Korea, Saudi Arabia, Korea, Germany, and whatnot. Will the future of hydrogen diplomacy be bilateral rather than multilateral, or you think can we make use of existing, in a circular logic, can we make use of existing international organizations to provide a permanent home for hydrogen diplomacy? Or is it just going in a bilateral transactional sense, as we've been hearing throughout the panel? So I'm just curious, what do you think from a diplomacy perspective?
From our perspective, I think it's going to be both, like a mixture between bilateral and multilateral relations. Bilateral because we have been like trading with each other for centuries, for millennia. As a matter of fact, some countries have a linguistic privilege to better talk, to better understand each other. So bilateral relations will remain for certain, and I gave a couple of examples, as Germany with its energy dialogues, energy partnerships, Saudi Arabia with its large amount of memorandum of understandings being signed in the last months, last years. But that's one part of the story that concerns much more those tangible assets. It's about technologies, it's about goods, items to be delivered. But above that level of bilateral relations taking anyway place among countries, which also foster a healthy competition again among us, we have that global perspective that is central to achieve what Mohammed and colleague also from Korea mentioned. We will definitely need for hydrogen to reach consensus when it comes to the quality, when it comes to internationally accepted standards. What do I buy, from whom, in what quality, in what quantities? Can it enter my market? Can I sell it further to my off-taker in my countries? And in that respect, we do need those globally accepted standards. We do need certification, as it has been the case for many, many other goods. Nobody wants like a fragmented sector of hydrogen, as it had been the case so far for gas or LNG, right? We do not want to repeat the same mistakes. That's why from a global level, and it is happening right now, it is still like we are still in the first steps when it comes to the global perspective. How will hydrogen be traded, from which centers, from which production centers to which off-taker places? But if we take a look at all the international fora, G20, if we take a look at all the international organizations like IRENA, even a UN organization like UNIDO, everybody is on it. They take a look at the potential numbers. If we take the most optimistic numbers from BNEF, as we speak of 24% of total global energy demand from hydrogen by 2050, turnover 700 billion, without taking ancillary services, etc., into consideration. It's just the trade of it. It's massive. It can't be without reaching a certain level of globally accepted standard certification we agree upon at the highest possible level. To sum up your question, it's gonna be a mix of bilateral because it is historically been the case that we simply trade with each other, even at the lowest level. Municipalities might also trade with each other. But if we take a look from that bird perspective, and again to avoid fragmentation, to avoid disparate ways of trading that future commodity, it is essential to foster also efforts that go towards, please, let's sit around the table and agree upon accepted standards. And again, everyone should be around the table in that respect.
Definitely. I mean, as you know, world peace, as it sounds, actually what you say is extremely important, because it's better to address challenges before they they are brought about, before they arise. I think it's much better that we are prepared for it beforehand, right?
Yep. If I might, to Mohammed, I have maybe one complementary thing to say. I think from all our study in energy economics, etc., I do consider like hydrogen is as a further step within a combination of steps. Usually, for us, it's energy efficiency first. Those megawatts are still the cheapest way for us to produce energy because we don't have to.
Right.
The second would be electrification, as usual, because I don't have all those losses like in an ICE. The amount of losses is just huge. Like whatever, if it's a car, it's a plane. Avoid all those losses by directly electrifying everything. And to support these renewables, of course, because as we mentioned, it is so cheap nowadays. And eventually we come to hydrogen in all the sectors that were mentioned by the colleagues. There's this combination of steps which we did not have so far. We still considered like energy in silos, like heat, transport, and electricity separated. And now we have at cheaper costs that special means to link them, thus achieving sector coupling, as you should have done in the last decades.
So what I hear is, if you go beyond silos and couple, or connect very different sectors together, actually you are getting some returns to scale and make things both economically and economically and politically viable.
Yeah.
In hydrogen investment. Thank you. I just want to add one very small point, and I want to ask a very quick question regarding, since this is a conference, my last question will be on what could research questions arise from this debate. But before that, I just want to share one thing. I think city-to-city diplomacy is also very important in promoting hydrogen. KAPSARC just is about to publish a book on smart cities, not hydrogen, but smart cities, where we examine how cities play a role in global energy transition. The U.S. Department of State is organizing a Western Hemisphere Smart Cities and Energy Transition Conference soon enough, where they will focus on the role of cities in promoting energy transition, which also includes hydrogen. So I think this city diplomacy is really taking hold. So there's a line of innovation there too. So my final question, Karthik. Now, you oversee a lot of research, right? And I'm going to go very quickly for the whole panel. I want to start with him. After this debate, what kind of research questions are there, probably for our aspiring, scholars here, as well as, curious folk like me? What kind of research questions are there that I think we could really take away from and turn into a good research agenda, a rewarding research agenda? Very quickly, but if you could just give us a couple of...
Yeah, absolutely. I think without sort of keeping it to technical domain, right, what I would say is, hydrogen is, if it is going to be the fuel of the future, we need a rules-based architecture that will ensure, right, that it's not concentrated in the hands of a few across the value chain. And for that, I think research needs to support how do you basically get to that system where there's this rules-based architecture on whether it is, for instance, interoperability, right, through operational safety standards, for instance, consensus on intellectual property. It cannot become one where, you're basically holding the rest of the world ransom to a particular technology that's developed. Because ultimately, we're all trying to get into this transition because it'll get us to a better place. And for all of this, we need that rules-based architecture. And I think too many of the pieces of work are focusing on the narrow issues of how do I get this to a lower cost in my domain or in my geography, but not so much about how can I ensure that this ecosystem scales and that I'm making this resilient overall. Right? And I think that's where the research must focus and the convening must focus. I think the understanding when it comes to the technologies and stuff is possibly there at some level, but then how do we basically bring people together to look at it? And most importantly, we know that ultimately prosperity has to happen, as Quentin was also saying, in a shared manner. And this is a new opportunity for the world to look at how do you basically ensure that industrial competitiveness in the hydrogen supply chain is distributed across. I mean, I saw Africa was completely missing, for instance, in any of the discussions. Right? While we see that the German minister is possibly going to Senegal for selling LNG, right, which is the example that somebody gave in the morning, how do we basically think of those countries also benefiting from the manufacturing ecosystem? Ultimately, they can't be suppliers today. So I think rethinking that and ensuring that the financing, of course, is one part, but more importantly, I think enabling the co-developing technology, right, which is region-specific and possibly appropriate for that region, would be, I think, the most important questions that I would look at, apart from, I think, the usual stuff that we all anyway like to do. Yeah.
my humble add-on to it would be we really haven't taken stock of the incentives and interests of major players involved. We assume a lot of things about these players.
Yep.
We take it for granted, but actually if we do enough survey or field work or somehow model it via different ways, we may come at very counterintuitive results. So that's my humble addition to your very insightful comments. Dr. Sung, what would you like to have? What kind of research questions would you ask after this panel or on this topic?
If I take examples, of course, in my country, in South Korea, that I see there are a lot of plans, not only from the government, but both the private sectors, or there are a lot of research from the academic institution of how useful and how powerful hydrogen will be in the future. But if I look at their plans in more details, that these plans really lack any timelines or details how to achieve these goals, or whether it is possible to achieve these goals or not. It's more sounds like an announcement. So in my opinion, I think it's more. We need more research, more detailed research in analyzing that goals and also pathways to achieve, or whether it is possible to achieve these goals. Otherwise, all the loud plans, or maybe other distinctive plans as a role of hydrogen in the decarbonization of South Korean industry cannot be realized, because if you set the goal first without any detailed plan to how to achieve it, then later it can be a problem. So I think we need more excluding our wishes or our the dreams. I think that we need to in more realistic way to in more detailed analysis in reaching these plans.
All right, thank you. Dr. Akimaya, how about?
Yeah, so I'll follow it along the same line with Kartik, in the sense that, the distribution of, utilization of hydrogen, and how it will be distributed, and, for the greater good, what would it be? And I would follow along that line and then add a few more caveat. Look, what is the, if this were to happen, I'm pretty sure that means hydrogen will grow significantly. And when hydrogen grows significantly, I'm 100% sure there will be new bottlenecks. So from a perspective of, where we are standing right now, it's probably a good idea to just, figure out the bottlenecks now, instead of, be there and then, oh, wait a minute, we didn't think this quite through. So I would say, kind of extend a little more about the future. When you look at data, the distribution or the demand for hydrogen will grow significantly. Well, what are the bottlenecks? I would focus on that, and I don't know. I'll end with the, I'm an optimistic. I think hydrogen will kind of start to take some steam in a couple of years, but how far will it go? That's I'm kind of, that's why I'm researching on hydrogen then.
The reason we are really thinking so much over this is because we want this to succeed, and it's better that we talk about these things now, and chart needs to be moved forward rather than much later. Quentin, if you please, let's have very quick final remarks for you, and I want to open the floor for Q&A.
Building on what the colleagues said, from my end would be de-risk, like access to investment, because it's all about, at the end, the biggest leverage we have is the financial means we can put on the table to foster R&D, to foster projects, even if they're only pilot projects, and how to de-risk the current fees. We see renewables are affordable, but still we haven't reached the actual spread of renewables we could have. If I take a look at all those promising countries that could potentially produce clean hydrogen, if I look at the weighted average cost of capital, it's not gonna fly. It's not gonna fly. And I can't change those two-digit numbers. And accordingly, how could I de-risk those investment issues?
And we know how de-risking works in other industries elsewhere, non-energy related maybe. So there is an opportunity to transpose what we know elsewhere in economics and apply it to hydrogen. So asking the question of what is hydrogen disruption a case of? You know, and maybe it's not in the energy world, but it's some, maybe in FMCG, maybe in, you know, VC, maybe somewhere else. But I think for us to really make this thing a success, maybe we should broaden our horizons beyond energy and learn what humanity has developed so far. So thank you very much. Oh, please, Coach.
You know, in the panel in the morning today, I think the gentleman talked about how with higher interest rates, you know, money goes back into the physical world, but with higher interest rates, money also goes out of the developing world back into the developed world.
Actually,
Right?
in your
So
comments,
basically, money gets taken out when the US Fed raises its interest rates, and as a result, there's less available today, right? Because they see that, well, you know, it's less risky for me to just put it in an ecosystem that I'm familiar with. So I'm not sure, right? So which of the two worlds is better necessarily for innovation? But we'll have to probably figure that out as well along the way.
one of the currents that we weren't unable to address in our talks was whether there's a window of opportunity now or not. But that one, for that, we didn't have a time. But certainly, thank you very much. So I open the floor for Q&A. Could we start with the gentleman over there? Just Salim, I cannot see, but yeah.
Microphone.
Who has the mic? The AMV people, where is the mic? Could you please?
Thank you, Emre, and thank you, our panelists.
If you could introduce yourself very
My name
briefly.
is Salim Al-Hajraf, CEO of Idama Consult from Kuwait. I'd like just to bring to this very interesting panel the time factor. If we recall the development, the early development of renewable, in fact, the solar panel technologies and wind technologies we are using today is not too far from the technology used in the mid-70s and early 80s. The only thing being developed over the last 30 years, the efficiency and the cost. So we should not jump ahead of the time, because time should be considered carefully, especially with the hydrogen development as a new commodity, because we are dealing with 4 key factors: production, storage, transportation, then utilization. People will not go and produce more if there is no application. And same thing, application and utilization will not be flourished if there is no continuous supply. So it's the function of supply and demand. I believe these 3 track of hydrogen economy development will move gradually in a similar fashion as wind and solar panels moved about 30 years. We do hope that it will not take 30 years, but it will take time. We have to consider this. I would like either the panel as a whole or some of our colleagues in the panel to comment on this topic. Thank you.
Time is extremely important component. And my follow-up question would be, you know, do we have enough time, even if time would heal all things, right? Kurt, you want to take us?
You know, one of the sort of like the grandfathers of the energy system in India constantly says this to policymakers, said this through the 2010s, right? And said India must wait for solar prices to come down as low as possible before they start, you know, having an aggressive program. But the important part for us to understand is, you know, it's a chicken and egg, right? Unless you have significant commitments of, you know, where the procurement of those electrolyzers are going to go, you're not going to see that scale develop. And the more important part is we cannot rely on countries where the ecosystem is entrenched with existing energy sources. For instance, Europe has a problem with the current gas system not being able to take up hydrogen in any big way. So transportation will effectively mean you have to think of a different way of transporting. In India, the transportation ecosystem is not set up, which means that India is definitely better placed for any form of hydrogen movement today, because in fact, more of our pipeline actually is hydrogen ready than anywhere else in the world. So I would think that waiting for the time period is probably not the way to go. But at the same time, as I mentioned, there are also sectors where from an economic perspective, hydrogen makes sense possibly even today or in the next 3-4 years, because that's the price at which they're currently consuming energy. Steel manufacturing is definitely one of them. Right? As much as we think that coal-based steel manufacturing is very, very cheap, for some of the, you know, secondary steel manufacturing that actually happens, which imports coal from Indonesia at a significant premium, and then the railway cost of delivering it, we think that, you know, a hydrogen-based DRI facility in India could actually deliver, you know, secondary steel, which is basically, you know, at a reasonably competitive price. And if you then further consider the impact on the further value chain, you see that that marginal cost is much smaller than what you actually anticipate as, as this massive difference in costs of production using hydrogen versus coal. So while I agree that there has to be a sense of wait and watch and not locking ourselves into a certain technology, the point you also made was that fundamentally the technology is not changing. It's really about efficiency. And hopefully, if that keeps improving with time, the investments over the course of the next decade or so can benefit from it. But I think countries like India should take the leap in sort of trying to get themselves autonomy from dependence on imported natural gas, which is very expensive anyway to start with.
All right. Are there any other takers? I'm going to make this question a bit more provocative. Do you want to just be outside of the club and get the best food coming out of that? Or do you want to be inside the club and be a part of the innovation?
We'll cook it.
Please
in German, like in literature, there is this concept of eine Raffung. With a Raffung, you can compress time. And time is indeed like a key parameter, but let's compress it with proper initiatives. I spoke about like the financial side with this famous H2 Global initiative. This is exactly what Germany put on the table, 900 million euro, and this is just the beginning. They will simply decrease the cost difference between producer and off-taker. And this is exactly what we need, actually. It's a risk. Let's take it. In the future, it is feasible that, and I think they're already discussing it, that we have exactly the same auction model at the European level. Thus, you drastically expand, the financial scope of those initiatives that are relevant to again diminish or mitigate risks both from the producer side and the off-taker side.
So Mohamed, please, Dr. Sunday.
I also would like to add one comment. If you look at the steel industry in Sweden, they have one or two companies already made a successful attempt in decarbonizing steel production using hydrogen. They replaced coal with the hydrogen, and it was possible thanks to the emission trading system, which made fossil fuels much more expensive in comparison with the hydrogen. Therefore, that it is possible to make hydrogen price competitive at this moment, but with help of functioning emission trading system. Therefore, but for example, in my country, South Korea is not very enthusiastic in introducing emission trading system, which we already have, but it's more like to maybe to show that we have the system, so that with the help of the successful institutional support, that hydrogen can be price competitive in many countries. But of course, that having a successful emission trading system is not an easy task. So I think there's not only the technological aspect, but also this kind of institutional support can make the price competitiveness or competitiveness of competing fuels. They can change the landscape of this in the energy industry. That's my question. Yeah.
All right. And within the context of how where should GCC maybe invest to become a leader if we want to stay in the club or in the club? Yeah.
Right. So again, with the GCC region potential, obviously, they need to take the lead on this. So getting back to the chicken or egg thing, if it's just going to be a waiting game, so it's like, should we wait until renewable energy is affordable enough until we move on from fossil fuels? Well, that might not suit very well with, the global agenda with, climate change. So, you as a country, you always have an option to, okay, I'll just stay dirty. But is this really the option that you were willing to take? Why not take the initiatives, in doing so, if you're the one that actually starts, investing, researching on, or some sort of development on this hydrogen, you'll actually take the upper hand when it comes to the industry. You have the, the technology, you'll have, the tidbits, you've learned a lot from, taking the initiatives. So there's, it's probably intangible, but, in the energy field, it can take you, far with that. I would just, straight away to the point. That's
Emre, maybe I don't want to have the final word, but just want to add to what Jinsok said, right? emissions trading. So I think from the perspective of developing countries with high populations like India, it's more so than climate change. It is local impacts like air quality that can actually significantly drive the uptake of newer solutions, right? So whether it is, EVs or FCEVs, or even, for instance, non-coal-based production process for industrial commodities, right? Because they contribute up to 30% of the ambient particulate matter comes from coal. So if I can envision a future where the health of the citizens, which is being impacted today, can actually sort of be improved. But unfortunately, that's the problem we're facing today. Policymakers don't want to acknowledge this cost of health and air quality. And the moment they do, they will see that you don't need an emissions trading system for CO2 to make it work. It's really the health cost that you're paying as a system already makes it feasible for you to use these alternative fuels. But the problem is that we need to move up to that level where we internalize some of those costs. I'm not sure to what extent is that a problem here in Saudi. For instance, when I looked out of my hotel room today, I see that it's reasonably hazy. That's probably because there's a lot of dust as well. But I can't imagine with the number of cars that you have in Riyadh, right, that it's actually sort of okay to be, driving, ICE vehicles to the extent that they are. So I'm sure there will be benefits even in the Saudi context. So, yeah.
All right. I think we can squeeze one more quick question. So are there any questions or just before? Please, sir. Could we please move the mic over there? Thank you. If you could just very briefly introduce yourself too. Thank you.
Myself, Muhammad Ansari from SABIC. So basically, my question goes to blue and green hydrogen. So when we are talking about blue and green hydrogen, so my blue is not your blue, my green is not your green. So there should be a color agnostic approach with the emission threshold associated with the hydrogen, irrespective of where it comes from. This is first question. Second question is that, comment on that is that when we are talking about green hydrogen, renewable comes into play. So it's better to utilize the electrons in most efficient way rather than thinking about hydrogen. This is one thing. And second, when you are talking about carbon dioxide, when you wanted to sequester carbon dioxide or utilize CO2 for production of blue hydrogen, so it goes hand in hand with certification where the CO2 is sequestered. So it's not just development of standards of our hydrogen, but also associated total value chain with respect to renewables, CO2 sequestration, and complete ecosystem. And it cannot be done by one single person, hydrogen alone. It's totally ecosystem along with different players, because when we import or export these particular things, it won't be same standards for different countries.
So I'm looking for one person to volunteer to answer this question, but it touches upon basically verification, a global effort towards standardization, and the governance and control of these efforts. So I want one volunteer. Anybody is fine, Quentin, could you just
I would start with the colors, because the EU, like many European countries, were keen on developing this taxonomy, and we've all noticed that there were some steps back made in that respect, and indeed like this more like agnosticity towards hydrogen is getting ground, I think, in the majority of the country. Green should be the final step for everyone. Even in literature here in Saudi, it is written, I would quote a couple of our colleagues from KAPSARC, green should be the final step for each and everyone. In the sense, blue would be like provisionary for a certain lap of time, but the green, for the sake of everyone, just to diminish to just zero potential emissions. Indeed, as different technologies will be used, but we will kind of accept green should be the key target. And regarding the element for certification in general and standards, I could not agree more. But there again, there is more in the debate to be developed. There is more among countries to be agreed upon, so that we reach the highest level of standardization as feasible and as wishable for all involved partners. But we are not there yet. But I think we all strive for higher standards.
All right. On that note, I'd like to conclude. I want to go back to Dr. Salem's point, where he's saying solar and wind have been really stable in its technological innovation. Hydrogen may not be. If you remember Star Trek from 1960s, 70s, right? The most advanced spaceship had a lot of switches on it. Nobody imagined a touch screen in all those futuristic films in 1960s, 70s, right? So we may all end up in a different world which has nothing to do with what we are discussing here. But I think this panel really highlighted that we should really be prepared from different ways we understand and we expect from hydrogen. And not that you necessarily represent your own countries, you're all individual researchers yourselves, but I think we saw different means of how pros and cons of hydrogen perceived in different settings. So that was very illuminating for me. Thank you very much. And I'd like please invite all of the attendees to give some applause for our panelists for this very enlightening discussion. Thank you very much.
The biggest part of